Jessica Morgan woke up that Monday morning with a feeling in her gut that something was off. The cheap alarm clock beside her bed had failed to go off, and she was already running 20 minutes late. She jumped out of bed, threw on her waitress uniform, and ran a brush through her tangled brown hair. "Not today of all days," she muttered, knowing her boss at the Golden Spoon would be watching her like a hawk after she'd asked for a raise last week. Outside her small apartment, the sky had turned an angry gray. As Jessica rushed to her car, a beat-up Honda that had seen better days 15 years ago, the first drops of rain began to fall. She fumbled with her keys, finally getting the door open, but when she turned the ignition, the engine made a sickening grinding noise before falling silent. "Come on, please," Jessica begged, turning the key again and again. Nothing but that same awful sound. She slammed her hands against the steering wheel and fought back tears. 3 months of tips had gone into fixing the transmission last time. There was no money for another repair. Jessica checked her phone. 8:37 a.m. Her shift started at 9 o'clock. If she ran to the bus stop right now, she might make it only 30 minutes late. She grabbed her purse, locked the useless car, and sprinted through the increasingly heavy rain. The bus was crowded and smelled of wet clothes and cheap cologne. Jessica stood holding onto a pole, checking her watch every few minutes as the bus crawled through morning traffic. By the time she reached her stop, her uniform was damp, her makeup had smudged, and she was definitely going to be late. The Golden Spoon was located in a fancy shopping plaza next to Winters Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that housed some of the city's most prestigious companies. Jessica always felt small walking past it, like she was invisible to the important people who worked there. Today, she didn't have time for that feeling. She ran across the parking lot, dodging cars and puddles. Just as the Golden Spoon came into view, Jessica glanced down at her phone to check the time, 9:23. Mr. Peterson was going to kill her. She picked up speed, rounding the corner of the building without looking up. Wacom. Jessica collided with someone coming out of the neighboring high-end restaurant. She felt hot liquid splash between them, followed by a shocked gasp. Time seemed to freeze as Jessica looked up into the face of a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that were now wide with shock and rapidly turning to rage. "Are you blind?" the woman shouted, looking down at her cream-colored designer suit, now splattered with dark coffee stains spreading across the expensive fabric. "I'm so sorry," Jessica stammered, reaching into her purse for napkins. "I didn't see you. I was running late." "So your tardiness justifies ruining a $3,000 suit?" The woman's voice was ice-cold, cutting through the air like a knife. People were staring now. A man in a dark suit stepped forward from behind the woman. "Ms. Winters, we should get you inside. Your meeting." "We'll have to wait, David," the woman snapped, her eyes never leaving Jessica's face. "I want this woman's information. She's going to pay for dry cleaning." Jessica's stomach dropped. $3,000? She could barely make rent this month. "Please, I'm really sorry. I'm already late for my shift. I work right there." She pointed to the Golden Spoon. The woman, Ms. Winters, narrowed her eyes and took in Jessica's uniform. A strange expression crossed her face, something calculating that made Jessica's skin crawl. "What's your name?" she demanded. Jessica Morgan." For a split second, something flickered in the woman's eyes. Recognition? Surprise? But it was gone so fast Jessica thought she might have imagined it. "Well, Jessica Morgan," Ms. Winters said, pulling out a business card and pressing it into Jessica's trembling hand. "You'll be hearing from me very soon." Jessica looked down at the card. Embossed in elegant silver letters was the name. Elaine Winters, CEO, Winters Aviation Group. Little did Jessica know that this disastrous morning, this simple collision, would change her life forever. And that the angry woman now walking away owned far more than just the plane tickets Jessica could never afford to buy. Jessica barely made it through her shift that day. Every time the door opened, she jumped, half expecting Elaine Winters to storm in with a team of lawyers. Her hands shook as she poured coffee, and she mixed up 2 orders, earning a stern look from her manager, Mr. Peterson. "You okay, Jess?" asked Tina, a fellow waitress who had worked at the Golden Spoon for nearly 15 years. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica shook her head. "Just having the worst day ever. My car broke down, and then I bumped into some rich lady outside and spilled coffee all over her fancy suit. Tina's eyes widened. Not the blonde in the cream suit, the one who came out of Pietro's next door. When Jessica nodded, Tina whistled low. "Oh honey, that's Elaine Winters. She owned half the buildings in this part of town, including this shopping center." Jessica's stomach dropped even further. "Great, so she's not just rich, she's my boss's boss's boss." "Something like that," Tina said with a sympathetic pat on Jessica's shoulder. "Just keep your head down. Maybe she'll forget about it." But Elaine Winters didn't forget. The next morning, Jessica was barely 10 minutes into her shift when Mr. Peterson called her into his small office at the back of the restaurant. "Close the door, Jessica," he said, his face unusually serious. Jessica's heart pounded as she sat down across from him. This was it. She was getting fired because of yesterday's incident. "I received a call from Winters Corporate this morning," Mr. Peterson began, confirming her fears. "About you." "I'm really sorry about what happened," Jessica blurted out. "I can explain." Mr. Peterson held up his hand. "I don't need explanations. Ms. Winters has requested your presence at Winters Tower today at 2 p.m. Jessica blinked in surprise. "She wants to meet with me." "Apparently so. And when Elaine Winters requests something, it happens." He handed her a slip of paper with an address and suite number. "You're excused from your afternoon shift. I suggest you don't keep her waiting." Jessica left work early to go home and change. She had exactly one outfit that could be considered somewhat professional, a simple black skirt and white blouse she'd worn to her high school graduation 4 years ago. The skirt was a bit tight now, and the blouse had a small coffee stain on the sleeve that she tried to hide with a black cardigan. Winters Tower looked even more intimidating up close. The glass and steel structure rose 40 stories above the city, reflecting clouds and sky. Jessica took a deep breath before walking through the revolving doors into the massive lobby with its polished marble floors and modern art sculptures. At the security desk, a guard checked her ID and made a quick call. "Ms. Morgan for Ms. Winters," he announced before handing Jessica a visitor badge. "Express elevator. 40th floor." The elevator shot upwards so fast Jessica's ears popped. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city. A sleek-looking woman behind the desk gave Jessica a once-over, her expression making it clear she found Jessica lacking. "Ms. Morgan? Ms. Winters is expecting you." She gestured toward a set of double doors. Jessica's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward them. Before she could knock, the doors swung open, revealing a massive office bigger than Jessica's entire apartment. Elaine Winters stood by the window, her back to the door, phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what the board thinks," she was saying sharply. "Just make it happen." She hung up and turned, her eyes locking onto Jessica like a predator spotting prey. "Jessica Morgan," she said coolly. "Right on time." "Good." Jessica remained frozen in the doorway. "I'm sorry again about your suit. I can pay for the dry cleaning, but I might need to do it in installments." "This isn't about the suit," Elaine cut her off, walking to her desk and picking up a folder. "That's already been taken care of." "Then why am I here?" Jessica asked, confusion replacing her fear for a moment. Elaine's red-painted lips curved into what might have been a smile, but it never reached her eyes. "I have a proposition for you. A way to make amends that would benefit us both." Jessica felt a chill despite the warm office. Something in Elaine's tone made her wonder if she'd somehow stepped into a trap. "I've been looking for someone to help with a special project," Elaine continued, circling her desk slowly. "And yesterday's little incident convinced me you might be perfect for it." "What kind of project?" Jessica asked, unable to imagine what skills a waitress could offer a woman like Elaine Winters. "How do you feel about planes, Jessica?" Elaine asked, her eyes never leaving Jessica's face. 3 weeks had passed since Jessica reluctantly agreed to Elaine's proposition. The deal was simple but humiliating. Jessica would work nights cleaning Winters Aviation's private jets to pay off the ruined suit. It was clearly an excuse. The suit couldn't possibly cost as much as all these extra hours, but Jessica couldn't afford to lose her regular job at the Golden Spoon, so she accepted. Tonight was like any other night. Jessica dragged herself to the private hangar after her restaurant shift, her body aching from being on her feet for 12 hours straight. The security guard, an older man named Frank, nodded at her as she swiped the temporary badge Elaine had given her. "Long day?" Frank asked, noting the dark circles under Jessica's eyes. "The longest," Jessica replied with a tired smile. "Which planes need cleaning tonight?" Frank checked his clipboard. "Just the Gulfstream. The big one at the end." He lowered his voice. "Heads up, Ms. Winters is here with her lawyer. Some kind of emergency meeting. They're in the conference room attached to the hangar. Probably best to stay out of their way." Jessica nodded gratefully. The last thing she wanted was another encounter with Elaine, who seemed to take pleasure in finding fault with Jessica's cleaning whenever their paths crossed. The Gulfstream G650 was the largest private jet in the Winters fleet. Jessica had been shocked the first time she saw inside one. It was nicer than any house she ever been in, with leather seats, wood paneling, and even a bedroom in the back. She started in the main cabin, vacuuming between the seats and wiping down the tables. As she worked her way toward the back, she heard voices coming from the conference room adjacent to the hangar. The door was slightly ajar, and Elaine's sharp tone carried clearly. "Time is running out, George," Elaine was saying. "The Morgan inheritance paperwork has to be dealt with before the deadline next week." Jessica froze at the mention of her last name. It had to be a coincidence, right? Morgan wasn't that uncommon. "I understand your concern, Elaine," a man's voice replied, "but legally we can't proceed without verifying if Harold's daughter is still alive." "It's been 25 years, Elaine snapped. "The woman abandoned her baby and disappeared. She's probably dead, and her kid with her." "The will is specific," the man, George, insisted. "If Jessica Morgan exists, she inherits controlling interest. Harold was very clear about that." Jessica's heart pounded so loudly she was afraid they would hear it. Jessica Morgan. Her name. They were talking about her, but that was impossible. Her mother had raised her alone after her father left before Jessica was born. At least, that's what her mother had always told her. "I've built this company into what it is today," Elaine continued, her voice rising. "I will not let some waitress waltz in and take everything I've worked for just because Harold had a guilty conscience at the end." Jessica's vacuum cleaner slipped from her hand, clattering loudly on the floor of the jet. The voices in the conference room stopped abruptly. "What was that?" George asked. "Probably the cleaning staff," Elaine replied dismissively. "Let's continue this in my office downtown. These walls have ears." Jessica scrambled to pick up the vacuum, her mind racing. She heard footsteps heading toward the exit on the far side of the conference room. Once she was sure they were gone, she crept toward the room. The conference table was littered with papers, and a laptop still sat open. Most of the documents had been gathered up, but in their hurry, they had left a folder behind. A folder labeled Morgan Inheritance. With trembling hands, Jessica opened it. Inside was a birth certificate, her birth certificate, with a name she had never seen before listed as her father, Harold Morgan, founder, Winters Aviation. There were other documents too. Photos of a man who had her eyes and her chin standing in front of a smaller version of the Winters Aviation logo. Legal papers with phrases that jumped out at her: 51% controlling interest, rightful heir, majority shareholder. Jessica sat down hard in one of the conference chairs, the folder clutched to her chest. The room seemed to spin around her. All these years she had thought she was nobody. A girl from the wrong side of town whose father hadn't wanted her. But according to these papers, she wasn't just somebody, she was the owner of Winters Aviation. Which meant the planes she had been cleaning, they belonged to her. And the woman who had been treating her like dirt for weeks was the one who had been hiding this truth from her. Jessica didn't sleep that night. How could she? Her entire life had just been turned upside down. She sat at her tiny kitchen table until dawn, reading and rereading the documents she'd taken from the conference room, trying to make sense of it all. Her father wasn't a deadbeat who had abandoned her. He was Harold Morgan, founder of Winters Aviation, a man worth millions. And according to his will, she was entitled to 51% of the company, making her the majority owner. But how could she prove it? Would anyone believe a waitress with coffee stains on her shoes over Elaine Winters, the polished CEO who clearly wanted to keep this information buried? At 7 a.m., Jessica made a decision. She picked up the phone and called the only lawyer she knew, Terry Chen, who had helped her neighbor with a landlord dispute last year. He had given the whole building his card, offering affordable legal help to people who couldn't normally afford it. "I need to see you today," Jessica said when he answered. "It's an emergency." 3 hours later, Jessica sat in Terry's modest office above a convenience store, watching his expression change from skepticism to shock as he examined the documents. "Jessica," he said finally, removing his glasses, "if these papers are legitimate, and they appear to be, you're sitting on a gold mine. And not just money, power." "So what do I do?" Jessica asked, wringing her hands. "First, we verify everything. Then we confront Elaine Winters with what we know." Terry hesitated. "But you should understand, she won't give up easily. People like her rarely do." "I need to know one thing first," Jessica said. "My mother, did she really abandon me like Elaine said? Did she know about all this?" Terry looked through the papers again. "According to this letter from your father, he didn't know you existed until shortly before his death. Your mother never told him she was pregnant. He hired a private investigator to find you both, but only located you after your mother had passed away." Jessica felt tears sting her eyes. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to support them, had gone without meals so Jessica could eat. She had died of pneumonia 5 years ago because she couldn't afford to take time off work to see a doctor. All while Jessica's father had been wealthy beyond imagination. "I want to meet with Elaine," Jessica said suddenly, wiping her eyes. "Not with lawyers. Just me and her, face to face." Terry looked concerned. "That's risky. She might." "I need to look her in the eye," Jessica insisted. "I need to know why she kept this from me." 2 days later, Jessica walked into Winters Tower again. This time, she didn't feel intimidated by the marble floors or the judgmental receptionist. This time, she knew the truth. Elaine looked up from her desk with an irritated expression when Jessica was shown in. "Ms. Morgan, I don't recall scheduling a meeting with you today." "We need to talk," Jessica said, her voice steadier than she felt. She placed the folder on Elaine's desk. "About my father, Harold Morgan." The color drained from Elaine's face. Her perfectly manicured hand reached for the folder but stopped midway. "Where did you get these?" "You left them in the conference room at the hangar." "I heard everything, Elaine." "About the inheritance." "About me." For a long moment, Elaine said nothing. Then, to Jessica's surprise, she laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Well, seems the cat's out of the bag." She stood up, walking to her office bar and pouring herself a drink. "I suppose you're here to claim what's rightfully yours." "I'm here to understand," Jessica said. "Did you know who I was when I bumped into you that day? Is that why you made me clean those planes? Was it some kind of joke to you?" Elaine took a long sip of her drink before answering. "I had been searching for Harold's daughter for months. When you told me your name, I couldn't believe my luck." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "I needed to buy time while my lawyers found a way around the will. I needed to learn what kind of person you were. So you've humiliated me, made me scrub toilets on planes that should have been mine." "I was evaluating you," Elaine corrected sharply. "And frankly, I wasn't impressed. You're nothing like Harold. You don't have what it takes to run this company." Jessica felt a flash of anger. "You don't know anything about me." "I know everything about you, Jessica Morgan. The question is..." Elaine leaned forward, her eyes hard as steel. "What are you going to do about it?" News of Jessica's identity spread through Winters Aviation like wildfire. By the end of the week, everyone from the janitors to the board members knew that Harold Morgan's long-lost daughter had been found and that she was claiming her inheritance. Jessica sat nervously in Terry's office as he explained what would happen next. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow," he said, straightening his tie. "They want to meet you before they make any decisions." "What if they don't believe me?" Jessica asked, tugging at the sleeve of the new blazer she'd bought for the occasion. It was the most expensive thing she'd ever purchased, and it still felt strange on her shoulders. "The DNA test results came back this morning," Terry reminded her, holding up the envelope. 99.9% match to Harold Morgan's stored sample. They can't deny the science. Still, as Jessica walked into the Winters Aviation boardroom the next day, she felt like an imposter. 12 people in expensive suits stared at her from around a massive table. Elaine sat at the head, her face a mask of professional calm. "Ms. Morgan," said an older man with gray hair, rising to greet her. "I'm Robert Wilson, chairman of the board. We've heard quite a story about you." Jessica took a deep breath. "It's not a story, Mr. Wilson, it's my life." A woman with glasses tapped her pen against a folder. "We've reviewed the DNA results and the documentation. There's no question you're Harold's daughter. The question is, what do you intend to do with a company you know nothing about?" Before Jessica could answer, Elaine stood up. "That's exactly my concern. This company employs thousands of people. Our pilots are responsible for passengers' lives every day. We can't hand over control to someone whose only qualification is her DNA." Several board members nodded in agreement. Jessica felt her confidence wavering. "May I say something?" came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes. He walked with a slight limp and carried a worn leather briefcase. "Thomas," Elaine said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect you today." "Clearly," Thomas replied dryly. He turned to Jessica. "You must be Harold's daughter. I can see him in your eyes." He extended his hand. "Thomas Grant. I was your father's best friend and the company's chief engineer for 30 years before I retired." "Thomas," Elaine said, her voice tight, "this is a closed board meeting. And I still own shares, which entitles me to attend." Thomas replied, taking an empty seat. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it. "I brought something that might interest everyone." He pulled out a weather journal and slid it toward Jessica. Harold kept this. His vision for the company, his hopes for its future. Thomas looked around the table, and his observations about its leadership. Elaine's face paled slightly. "That's private property." "Actually," Thomas said, "he wanted his daughter to have it. He told me so before he died." Jessica opened the journal with trembling fingers. Inside were drawings of planes, notes about safety innovations, and pages of personal reflections. Her father's handwriting, her father's thoughts, a connection to the man she'd never known. "There's something else you should all know," Thomas continued, looking directly at Elaine. "Harold was planning to make changes before he died. Big ones. He was concerned about how the company was being run." A murmur went around the table. Jessica looked up from the journal, her eyes landing on a particular page where her father had written, "Profits over safety is never acceptable." "What kind of changes?" asked Robert Wilson, leaning forward. "He discovered cost-cutting measures that compromised safety protocols," Thomas said, "maintenance schedules being stretched, cheaper parts being substituted." He was gathering evidence to present to the board. All eyes turned to Elaine, who remained perfectly still. "That's absurd," she finally said. Harold was ill, confused. "So you denied changing the maintenance schedule on the Miami fleet?" Thomas asked, pulling out more documents from his briefcase. Jessica watched the room shift before her eyes. The board members who had been looking at her with skepticism were now looking at Elaine with growing concern. She suddenly understood that this wasn't just about money or power. Lives were at stake. Her father's legacy was at stake. Jessica stood up, feeling stronger than she had in her entire life. "I think," she said clearly, "this meeting has only just begun." 3 weeks had passed since the explosive board meeting. Jessica sat by the window in her father's old office, now her office, watching planes take off and land at the private airfield below. So much had changed so quickly. The board had voted to temporarily suspend Elaine from her duties while they investigated the safety allegations. Jessica, with Thomas's guidance, had stepped into a leadership role that still felt too big for her. Every morning, she woke up thinking it had all been a dream. Every night, she fell asleep wondering if she was making the right decisions. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Diane, the office manager who had once looked down her nose at Jessica, but now treated her with cautious respect. "The maintenance crew is here for the meeting," Diane said, "and Mr. Grant just arrived." Jessica nodded, smoothing down her simple navy dress. She still refused to spend thousands on clothes like Elaine had, but she'd learned that looking the part helped people take her seriously. In the conference room, 20 men and women in Winter's aviation maintenance uniforms waited nervously. Most of them avoided eye contact. Jessica understood why. They were afraid. Under Elaine's leadership, those who spoke up about safety concerns had been fired. "Thank you all for coming," Jessica began, her voice steadier than it had been in her first days. "I know many of you are worried about your jobs. Let me start by saying that no one in this room will be punished for telling the truth." Thomas, sitting beside her, nodded encouragingly. An older mechanic with grease-stained hands raised his hand. "With all due respect, Ms. Morgan, we've heard promises before." "I understand your skepticism, Mr. Rodriguez." "Joe Rodriguez, been with this company 22 years. Jessica held his gaze. "Mr. Rodriguez, my father built this company on two principles: take care of your planes and take care of your people. Somewhere along the way, those values got lost. I'm here to bring them back." She pulled out the journal Thomas had given her. "My father wrote that the mechanics were the backbone of Winters Aviation. He trusted you with people's lives. I want to earn your trust, and I want you to feel safe telling me what's really been happening." Slowly, the stories came out. Maintenance checks rushed to save time. Parts reused when they should have been replaced. Reports altered to meet deadlines. Jessica and Thomas took notes, asked questions, and, most importantly, listened. By the end of the meeting, the tension in the room had shifted. Hope had replaced fear in many faces. "This is just the beginning," Jessica told them. "Together, we're going to fix this." After everyone left, Thomas stayed behind. "You did well today," he said. "Harold would be proud." Jessica smiled, but it faded quickly. "The board meeting is tomorrow." "Elaine's lawyers will fight back hard." "Yes, they will," Thomas agreed. "She's built powerful alliances over the years." Just then, Jessica's phone rang. It was Terry. "Jessica, turn on the news," he said urgently. "Channel 7. Jessica grabbed the remote and switched on the conference room TV. There on screen was Elaine Winters standing at a podium. "Accusations against me are not only false, they're malicious," she was saying, looking every inch the wronged executive. "Winters Aviation has maintained the highest safety standards under my leadership. These attacks come from an inexperienced young woman who happened to discover she has famous DNA and now thinks she can run a company." The camera cut to a reporter. "Ms. Winters also claims to have evidence that Jessica Morgan is not, in fact, Harold Morgan's daughter, and that DNA tests were tampered with." Jessica's mouth fell open. "She's lying," she whispered. "Of course she is," Thomas said grimly. "She's desperate." The reporter continued. "In related news, the FAA has announced a full investigation into Winters Aviation following anonymous tips about safety violations." Jessica's phone began buzzing with messages from board members. The battle she thought she'd been winning had just escalated into full-scale war. She thought about the maintenance crew, their families, the passengers who trusted Winters Aviation with their lives. This wasn't just about her inheritance anymore. It was about doing what was right. "Thomas," she said, turning off the TV, "I need everything we have. Every record, every report, every piece of evidence. It's time to stop playing defense." Thomas smiled, a glint of her father's determination reflected in her eyes. "Now you're thinking like a Morgan." 6 months after that fateful coffee spill, Jessica sat in the CEO's chair at the head of the boardroom table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the new Winters Morgan Aviation logo on the wall. The room was packed. Board members, department heads, and a few special guests. "The final safety audit report came in this morning," Jessica announced, sliding folders across the table. "The FAA has cleared us on all counts. Every single plane in our fleet now exceeds safety requirements." A round of applause filled the room. Robert Wilson, still the chairman of the board, nodded approvingly. "In 6 months, you've turned this company around," he said. "Profits are up, employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, and our reputation has recovered remarkably well." Jessica smiled, but it was a humble one. "I had a lot of help." She glanced at Thomas, who sat to her right. The past months had been a crash course in aviation, business management, and corporate politics, and she couldn't have survived it without him. "There's one more item on today's agenda," Jessica said, straightening in her chair. "Please show Ms. Winters in." The room fell silent as Elaine Winters entered. She looked different, thinner, with less makeup, her designer suit replaced by a simple black dress. The investigation had been hard on her. When the evidence of safety violations became overwhelming, she had resigned rather than face criminal charges. "Thank you for coming," Jessica said formally. Everyone expected her to gloat, to enjoy this moment of final victory over the woman who had tried to deny her birthright and then publicly smear her name. "I've asked Ms. Winters here today because I have a proposal," Jessica continued. She slid a folder across the table to Elaine, who opened it with visible suspicion. "The Winters Foundation for Aviation Safety and Education," Elaine read out loud, her eyebrows rising in surprise. "My father built this company from nothing," Jessica explained, addressing the whole room but keeping her eyes on Elaine. "He'd valued safety above profits. He also valued second chances." She stood up, walking around the table. "The foundation will provide scholarships for underprivileged students interested in aviation careers. It will fund safety research. And it needs someone to run it, someone who knows this industry inside and out." Elaine's eyes widened as she understood. "You're offering me a job?" Jessica nodded. "You made mistakes, serious ones, but your business skills are undeniable. The foundation would give you a chance to use those skills to rebuild your reputation and to do some good." The room was dead silent, everyone watching this unexpected turn of events. Finally, Elaine spoke. "Why would you do this after everything I did to you?" Jessica thought about her own journey, from struggling waitress to CEO, from poverty to wealth, from powerlessness to responsibility. "Because my father's journal had one more lesson in it," she said quietly. "Success isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about lifting people up, even those who tried to keep you down." Later that afternoon, Jessica slipped away from the office and drove to the Golden Spoon. She still wore her business clothes, but she tied an apron around her waist and stepped behind the counter. "What are you doing?" asked Tina, her old coworker, laughing in disbelief. "Keeping a promise," Jessica replied, pouring coffee for the customers. "I said I'd cover your shift today so you could go to your daughter's school play." As Jessica served tables, customers did double takes, recognizing her from the news, but she just smiled and asked if they wanted refills. At the end of her shift, Mr. Peterson, her old boss, shook his head in wonder. "You own half the city now, and you're still serving coffee." Jessica looked around the restaurant, at the hard-working staff, the rushed customers, the spilled coffee being mopped up in the corner. "I never want to forget where I came from," she said simply, "or how quickly life can change." She untied her apron and headed for the door, but stopped to leave a tip that would change her server's life, just as hers had been changed by a chance collision 6 months ago.